Is the martial arts system or style Aikido wrong for a street fight? That's the question today. Well, let me begin by saying this. Um, what martial arts style or system is right for a street fight? Well, Aikido, most of us are familiar with it, which began in the early 20th century, Aikido proper, that is, by then founder Morihei Ueshiba, who is the founder of Aikido. Aikido, some people pronounce it, which means way of harmony. In other words, it is a method of fighting that works along with an opponent attacking you as opposed to you being the aggressor. In other words, when someone attacks you, you become one with their movement, taking them off of their balance and misdirecting or redirecting their energy, turning it into a throw or a arm or wrist lock, if you will. This is Aikido, generally speaking. Aikido began in the 14th century, actually, but before the official Aikido came into existence, it was known as Aikijitsu, which did indeed contain strikes. Morihei Ueshiba removed those strikes. He studied Aikijitsu. He removed those strikes, and he wanted to be more humane in dealing with a self-defense situation by trying not to fight the opponent, but keeping intact the core of Aikido, which was the synthesis of movement with your opponent's energy. I hope I didn't confuse you there. So anyway, if you watch Aikido or Aikido practitioners, looks almost like ballet. They go through a regimen of movements. There's what we call an uke, which is the one that's receiving the attacker, in other words, who's receiving the response, and the tori, which is the one who is the defensive partner. Now, this is done to protect one another. You learn what we call also ukimi, which is falling practice. You have to learn how to fall, you have to learn how to roll, you have to learn how to absorb energy, and so forth. So, at your leisure, I would advise you to go and look at some Aikido videos, maybe on YouTube, um, to get a better comprehension of the art of Aikido. But anyway, some people believe that Aikido is nothing more than a set of dance like movements and that it is not effective in the street. I want to let you know this. Just because you don't know something and just because you're not trained in something does not necessarily mean that it's not effective as it relates to martial arts. Aikido is one of those things. Now, don't forget what I just said a moment ago. Aikido began as Aikijitsu, which had strikes, and because of Morihei Ueshiba's love for humanity, he didn't want to hurt an opponent by striking. So what he did was he changed Aikido to some degree where you hurt yourself. Don't attack me if you don't want to hurt yourself. In other words, those are my words. So now we know Aikido in the 80s became popularized by motion picture star actor Steven Seagal, who studied and trained and taught Aikido in Japan. As a matter of fact, he was one of the first people that were Americans that were allowed to teach Aikido in the country it came from, in Japan. So now he's made it popular here in America during the 80s. And then he had some films, Above the Law and Out for Justice and things like this, where you saw Aikido. What you saw Steven Seagal doing for the most part was Tenshin Aikido or Aikijitsu for the most part because he was striking, I would imagine, in the movies for appeal. People like action. And I don't think too many people appreciate just Aikido and the raw in the movie. You would have to have some strikes, add some kicks and so forth in there to make it even more interesting as an action film, and that's what Steven Seagal did. But for the most part, Aikido does not contain strikes. So what I want to inform you of right now is this: an Aikidoist in today's modern world against a street fighter, and a good street fighter, even an average street fighter, should be aware, should study other arts. It doesn't have to be their core art if Aikido is the thing that they really do. You need to understand how a street fighter fights. You need to understand that it's not going to be an orthodox street fight like you would in your dojo. So, for example, in Aikido, you have a partner, he attacks you straight or at an angle, and your response is going to be to redirect his motion, his energy again, and failing him at the end. It's not going to happen that way in a street fight. In a street fight, if they have any knowledge, the street fighter that is, that you know any martial arts, they're going to be that much more amped up. They're going to be that much more prepared, and they're going to be deceptive. It's unorthodox, period. And you're going to try to assume a stance of an Aikidoist in a street fight. They're not going to attack you the way that your partner will in your dojo. So you need to be aware of that, and you need to have that type of training implemented into your Aikido program as well. How do street fighters really fight? So, getting to the crux of the matter, is Aikido wrong for a street fight? I would venture to say it's based on the amount of time that you have in your art. Also, your common knowledge and your common sense as to how street fighting actually is. If you're going to go into a street fight with 1 or 2 years of Aikido against a good street fighter, you might get your behind handed to you. It behooves you to understand Western boxing and to implement that into your Aikido program. You can still do your traditional Aikido, but have a program outside of that that really pinpoints how street fighting is, and you should have people throwing techniques at you or attacks at you as if you were in a street fight, and see how well your Aikido fares. And if you have to tweak it for that, then by all means do that if you really want to survive a street fight. But if you're just going to go traditional street fighting, traditional Aikido against a street fighter, you might need some help at the end. Make sure you know the world in which you live. Many of these traditional arts came up during the 14th century and before, and they were designed, they were created for the times that they were created, and they were not designed for modern times. Fundamentally, they're good. They are sound in structure and principle based on physics and so forth. But we're not living in those times anymore. We are living in a modern time of evolution, evolutionary thinking. People are not the same as they were 200 years ago, 300 years ago, in the way in which they fight in the street. It's just not that way. So if you think someone is going to stand still and allow you to put a joint lock on them in the street, it's not going to happen. If you think someone is going to stand still and look at you and then decide to just come at you with a technique that you are familiar with in your dojo, your dojang, it's not going to work that way. They are going to try to be as deceptive as possible, as cunning as possible, as swift as possible, and as aggressive and unorthodox as possible. Aikido was not designed for that. No karate system was designed for that, but the foundation you have. But you must learn to build on your foundation. Those things that are more practical for today's time. So, in conclusion, is Aikido wrong for a street fight? If you don't understand the streets, it is. This is Brother Teacher. Let me know what your opinions and or your feelings are about this subject in the comment section below. Be blessed.